Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back here to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism, the podcast here with myself, Adam Piercy, and my co-host, Mick Mulroy. Mick, I'm going to jump right into it today because this is going to be what I think we're calling a drop-in episode, or a drop episode, where we put it out as soon as we record it or as soon as we can. In the modern day of current events, the current events basically going on right now are that I think it's Hamas has begun releasing 20 or in groups of 20 hostages from the Israel-Hamas conflict going on right now. And earlier this week, you messaged me and said, I really want to talk about this from a very specific perspective. And so I think, for everybody out there, before we get moving, I think, it's important to say that what Mick and I are talking about here is our general, this is our opinions on something that we believe to be universal. We're not picking sides. But I think it's important to say that there is a current event that has prompted this because, it's important to us. And as a co-host to Mick, it was important to Mick to talk about this. And I think it's good that we facilitate that. So, Mick, why don't you lead us off with your initial thoughts on the current events going on and what led you to want to talk about this today?
Yes. So as you know, and our listeners might know, I'm a ABC News national security and defense analyst. It's part of my job. The other part is we have a company that delivers humanitarian aid, mostly into conflict zones, if not exclusively into conflict zones, that are very difficult to get into. So my familiarity with Gaza in the last 2 years of this conflict is pretty deep, including, delivering aid through the maritime corridor and airdrops. But my point in texting you, and I texted you when I was on the air watching these hostages be released.
Yeah.
It's not to talk about the conflict in Gaza. You can question issues on both sides, the level of civilian casualties, 67,000, the restrictions of humanitarian aid as a means of war. So it's not about that. It's about the endurance and the will to live that these 20 individuals had in order to make it 2 years in the tunnels below Gaza, even being forced to dig their own grave, essentially almost starved to death. So again, it's not, we could have a whole episode, or certainly somebody could, on Gaza. You could have a series on it. That's not the point. The point is, no matter what your feelings on the issue, it's not okay to keep somebody hostage and torture them. If you're okay with that, you're not okay. But again,
agreed.
It's really about the level of endurance. And it was, if you are familiar with Viktor Frankl, which most Stoics are, in Man's Search for Meaning, it had a lot of connections. I was literally, while I was waiting to do my talking, I was looking up different quotes from Frankl's book. The parallels were just striking to me, and unfortunately, it's part of human history of this people having to endure what they should not, and those that survive it usually have that commonality, which is, the Nietzsche quote: "He who has a will to live can bear almost any how." Right, and that was also, a main refrain in Man's Search for Meaning. And I think that is something that Stoics understand. Seneca's, fire tests gold, but adversity suffering tests brave men. That is something that I think as Stoics we exemplify. In fact, in some ways, when you call somebody a Stoic, that's what you're referring to. Mm-hmm. And it is something that I think in modern day life you can draw inspiration from. It's it's something that you can say, well, if these individuals, if Viktor Frankl, if they can endure it, then what I'm facing, so can I. It's not necessarily what's done to you; it's how you deal with it. And I think that is a key life lesson that you can take with you from Stoicism and from, unfortunately, with these individuals. And there's no way you can watch I'm sitting there on TV, watching the reunion with parents and their kid, with wives and their kid, with kids and their fathers. And there's no way you can't understand the emotion of how that would go. So I just thought it would be a
Yeah.
worthy topic for us to talk about on our podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely resonated with me as soon as you brought it up. I mean, uh, going back to Frankel, I mean, Frankel is a Holocaust survivor, or was a Holocaust survivor, and I grew up in Europe and spent time visiting some of those sites, and the horrors of that. I mean, are absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, we see things today that in different places all over the world that, at least, you know, are similar in circumstance. But the ability for people to find that meaning and find that will to survive is something that, for myself as well, I mean, has definitely been inspiring. Is a funny term because it's like it sounds like you're sort of looking at it like it's a school lesson, but at the same time, I think it is inspirational in the sense of inspiring us to be the best form of ourselves, or to be to dig deeper and keep pushing, or keep fighting, keep going. So I think for me, this is something where you can take that universal lesson as human beings. So sometimes it's the case of what, I think Donald Robertson talks about this a little bit, where when you look at it from above, you could say, well, when I get that crappy email from a coworker, it's definitely not as bad as some of the things we're talking about.
Right.
And I can endure that. But sometimes people are going through literally these things that take us down to the base levels of humanity and human emotion and human existence. And people can find a will to keep going and keep moving forward on that. And I mean, that is very unique. So I'll quickly point out that there's a story that I try to remember, which is where I think it was Antoninus Pius, but it might have actually been a Greek philosopher. I can't remember, where someone I think struck him or punched him or something like that, and the person immediately went to apologize, and he said something like, nothing bad happened, it's okay, right? He sort of ignored it. And I think maybe something that you're hinting at, and I'd love to hear your view on, is that in some of this, it's not opinion, but it's like the decision you make in reaction to something is the most important thing. So even if you're going through the toughest moments, if you make the decision to continue, you carry that forward, I think that really stands here. What do you think is a good lesson to take from this circumstance? And I know this isn't a teachable moment, but that's how we talk about these things, right? As we
Yeah,
what we learn.
I think part of it is a mindset. If you focus on what's being done to you,
Yeah.
and you can understand why somebody would, right? Um, and you realize that you don't actually have the ability to change it physically,
Yeah.
you could give up, because logically you could go down the road of, I can't change my situation. It's not the condition I'm in is not something I can live with. Therefore, I wish I could just die,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, the switch in mindset is, I can't do anything about it, but I can, in my own self, determine that I am going to go above it. I am going to endure, because I have a will to live that is far beyond their capacity um,
Yeah.
to do something to me. Even in death, that mindset can say, I owned my own self until the end.
Mm-hmm.
So a part of it is, and I think there's a reason why we're fascinated in these type of stories, because there's a lot of them in history. It's not because I hope it's not, you like to see people suffer. I don't think that's a universal thing, but it's you want to see them endure, because it gives inspiration. Unfortunately, it's usually suffering because of other humans, but
Yeah.
it is. And I saw another story I wanted to reference is, and I read the book and then I saw the movie, which is, I think, exceptional. It's called The Survivor. If you haven't seen it, it's a true story of Harry Haft, I believe, written by his grandson. He was also in Auschwitz, um, just like Frankel was in Auschwitz. I don't know if they knew each other, but in the movie, and I'll just summarize it briefly. These Nazi guards would make people box, like for their own entertainment, and in a uniquely Nazi way. They took it beyond what we used to call smokers, right, in the Marine Corps. They made if whoever lost, they killed, right? So losing was fatal. And this guy Harry Haft, who ended up fighting in the United States, professional heavyweight, also part of the story. But he was a fairly good boxer, and so he kept surviving, right? The survivor.
Yeah.
And then a very, very poignant part of the movie, he's forced to fight a very close friend of his. And the friend is not the boxer type, right? So more of the bookish, not physical.
Yeah.
So, I mean, can you even imagine being put in this situation, right? Where you actually have to fight to the death your own friend, right? So you're probably wondering, like, how the hell is this story going to end up good? It doesn't end up good, but I tell you, it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, this mindset. Yeah. So, Harry's obviously beating him and doing the best he can not to. Yeah. And then it becomes apparent, the Nazis are going to kill his friend. Right? He'll lose and then they'll shoot him. So his friend just tells you, I don't want to be killed by them. I want to be killed by you. Right? So the last thing he said was, this is my choice, so I'll own my destiny. Yeah. Right? So I think it's called the Shema. It's the last prayer that Jews say, or it's actually a prayer they say commonly, but they also say it. So he put his knee on his friend's neck and said the Shema together. And then he, cut off his hair.
Yeah.
So a horrible story, I know. So, I mean, hopefully it doesn't make you like big down to the rest of the day. But the point being is, this situation, he wasn't going to change, man. There's a dozen Nazi guards with guns around you. You're not going to get out of it. And one of you are going to get killed. So, but the friend, knowing that, obviously it was going to be him, had he owned himself at the end. Yeah. And as horrible as it is, to your point, from his perspective, looking at it, it's inspirational. Yeah. Because you had that last chance to take it on yourself, and he did it, right? Yeah. And for all we know, Viktor Frankl was there when it happened. But I think it's a really important point to point out, because there's so many trials and tribulations that everybody goes through in life. And if you have that sense of, it's going to happen and I'm going to own who I am throughout, I think it can help anybody.
Yeah. And so what I take away in a lot of these circumstances, right, is something that I think is very prevalent within Stoicism, which is, I don't want it to be misunderstood as individualism, just thinking about yourself. But the understanding in Stoicism is that there's one thing you can always control, which is your choices and your actions, right? You take personal responsibility that. And we talked earlier in this season about character, right? It's what you do when nobody's looking. And when nobody's looking and you take that time to really ask yourself, like, what's the right call here, right? And you make that decision, that's the thing that we talk about as Stoics when we talk about that responsibility. It's an individual responsibility in the sense, if I can't change what they're going to do, that person's going to harm me, that person's going to slander me, that person's going to whatever. But ultimately, it comes down to the choice that you make. And it was a big change in my life where I did make that choice, right? When I came this way towards Stoicism. And I think a lot of people ask themselves that question, right? Is they're like, well, what does it mean, right? To be Stoic or whatever. And in many cases, I think it's personal responsibility. And so, because, we have to learn from these kinds of circumstances, these extremely hyper hyper realized circumstances, in the circumstances of a war or a Holocaust or prison or whatever it is, right? Is that, so much of this comes down to your own choice and your own decisions of what you're going to do and how you're going to take care of it, right? And I think that's something that is almost more important to me than remembering than memorizing the four cardinal virtues or whatnot. They're super important. I think they're obviously the four pillars of what we do as Stoics. But I think this idea around this choice, this decision that you make, I think is really important. James Stockdale, right? He was talking about what it was like when he was in the Hanoi Hilton when he had been shot down in Vietnam. And what's really interesting is his words around this eventually led to this term called the Stockdale paradox, which is the idea that the people who struggled and didn't make it were the ones who had really lofty ideals, like, oh, we're going to be rescued by the army tomorrow and the war will be over. And it was super high, super high, great. And yes, we all wish that would happen, but I can't make that happen. What I can do is I can choose what I'm going to do right now in the reality of the situation. And so Stockdale found that the people who survived were not the people who gave up, or not the people who also believed in like a fantasy that they were going to get rescued in an hour. It was the people who made a choice to look at their reality and say, this is going to suck. It's going to be horrible. We're going to be taken to the point where we are stripped of everything except our primal base things of being a human being. But we're going to choose to keep going because eventually we're going to get out of here. And that's why I always come back to choice. I always come back to the decisions that we make. And that's really important to me, is understanding that the choice is the one thing I have, right? And everyone thinks the choice is to quote George Carlin, right? It's like paper or plastic, Visa or MasterCard or whatever it is. That's not really choice. We're talking about human choice, the choice about what we do, who we are as human beings. And it's these circumstances like the current events we were talking about, or the events in history, which are so terrible, where you see people making a choice to be better, to do something better. So I don't know. I mean, these are the lessons that I take away from this. It's not a simple one, but I think it's a real one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to look at, is what's the real choice here.
And a lot of these conflicts, if you listen to the discussion around them, it's you did this, I did this, but you did that. Right. It's a continuous back and forth of accusations about what the other side did. I get that. But what I think we're talking about today is you're responsible for your actions, period.
Yeah.
Right. To your analogy, guy hits someone. He could hit him back. He could say, you just hit me, I hit him back. That's the common thing. The Stoic way, although I don't think Stoics should take punches in the face without defending himself. But point being is, you're still responsible for your actions. You can't just say, you're a horrible person, therefore I can be. If that's the case, then that's how conflicts happen, wars. That's how atrocities happen and keep happening, because it's a justification for horrible action because the other side is horrible. Right?
Right.
So every side should be accountable for their own action, every individual and every country. In this case, we're talking about this scenario that these people are in. And Stockdale, he obviously quoted Frankl quite a bit in his writings, and he spoke often to an academic setting, particularly at the Naval Academy. I have a quote from him. So, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is the modern parallel to Epictetus. Both knew that a man's spirit can remain free even in chains.
Yeah.
Right. And he talked about how logotherapy, which is the psychoanalytical school that Frankl developed, was essentially Stoicism in modern terms. I think that was almost the exact quote. I don't remember exactly. Mm-hmm. But he was saying, Frankl summed up, a couple thousand years of Stoicism in that. And I think Frankl obviously was very schooled in ancient philosophy. I probably wouldn't call it logotherapy. And logo, of course, does mean reason, but it also means meaning. Like that's man's search for meaning, right?
Yeah.
That's where it comes from. So obviously he was heavily influenced by, the philosophy of the ancient Greeks, and I imagine Stoicism was profound in that, because it certainly is. If you read his man's search for meaning, I think you can see it as evidently in throughout the book.
Yeah. And the thing that I find so often when I go through this is that people will say, like, well, why do you read this thing that's 2,000 years old or whatever? Why do you read this thing from this guy who went through this 80 years ago or whatever? And I always find myself going back to the fact that, like, and this is something Seneca was saying, right? It's like, well, if you find something better, then do that. But the challenge is there's a purity to these things where they're so simple and true that they just don't really erode over time, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of things from the ancient world that we kind of needed to let go, right?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
there are not four elements, right? Um, uh, uh, things like that. But ultimately, vaccines and germs and all the things of the modern world. But at the same time, there is a truth, or like a core value system that comes with these things that I think is pretty universal, right? That people can get behind, and that's why we do these things. But I think so much of it still is this choice. But you're right. I mean, it's the thing that gets me is I'm so disappointed in us, not you and me. Sorry, no offense. I'm not disappointed in you, Mick, but I am so disappointed just as a person, as a human being, right? Like, I am someone, and please understand before I say this, I do understand context and I do understand that it's not the same, but ultimately, like, I am someone who reads up on these conflict zones and things like that. And I am disheartened by the fact that we are making the same choices. We are making the same decisions that are leading to these horrible things to be happening. And it happens over and over again. But I am emboldened, right? My character is emboldened by reading about people, like, in these conflicts, who strap on a helmet and run into a building that's been blown apart to save people and whatnot, right? And they're making a choice. In the worst conditions ever, they are making a choice to decide to take an act and turn it into something where you could save a life, right? And so, that's what I keep trying to remember as I read about all these things going on. It's the news is horrible to read sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can learn from these moments of extreme, base conditions of being a human being, and you can take things away from it that I think are positive, or at least good enough to say, yeah, okay, I can learn from that person's struggle.
And I
So,
think the other lesson learned, Adam, is, at least for myself, listeners can make their own decision, is if you find yourself justifying acts of whatever side you happen to be on by
yeah,
pointing out the atrocities on the other, you're part of the problem, or I'd be
yeah,
part of the problem,
yeah,
right? So, and then not just in the context of the war in Gaza, but anything.
yeah,
If we had another talk about political discourse and violence in politics. If you enter that debate or discussion only pointing out the atrocities on the other side,
yeah,
you're fomenting the issue. You have to get your own house in order to have a positive impact on ending the conflict, whether it is domestic political violence or
yeah,
uh, you know foreign conflicts.
yeah,
It's again, it goes to the theme: you're responsible for your actions, and your words are your actions.
yeah,
So you need to be equally condemning of the side you happen to think you're on as you are to the other side when it comes to, especially, like, obvious um, moral, uh, immoral actions.
yeah,
If you,
absolutely.
yeah, you simply avoid talking about the immoral actions on your side, you talk about the other, you are promoting the very conflict you are talking about, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it starts in so many ways, right? With the small choices we make every day, right? Like, that's the interesting thing here is it we can so much come back to the personal choices that we make. It's easy when you have these very, very visible, uh, circumstances that happen, like these current events we started the podcast on, right? To pick on that and say, well, this is very specific. And, like, someone might say, well, I know what I would do in that circumstance. But I think it really comes down to the things that we do every day. I call this practice, right? And I can't remember if you call it that, or I don't know if you have a term or anything. I can't remember that. I apologize. But ultimately, I do think it is about the things that we do every day. But it comes down to the choices that we make every day, right? And I mean,
Mhm.
I think that's really important. But when when you look at these circumstances of these people going through this, you just have to be able to take away from that something else. And looking at it introspectively towards yourself, I think is one of the first steps that you can take to figure out, you know, who you are and what you want to do and the choices you're going to make as you go forward in all of this. I try to remember this quote from Marcus Aurelius, and I'm not going to be able to quote it offhand because for some reason we start recording and I can never remember these quotes perfectly. But there's a quote from Meditations where Marcus says something like, "So many other people have made it through this," right? And he says
Mhm.
something like, "That doesn't mean that you're going to succeed, but it means that it's possible, and you have to remember
Yes.
that." And I think
Yes, I
that's
know the quote
yeah,
you're talking about. It's like,
right.
if it can be done, you can do it.
Yes.
Right.
But it's what I think is really interesting is he doesn't say you will do it. He doesn't
Mm.
say someone else can do it, so you will do it. He says
Right.
you can do this too because it is
Yes.
possible because someone else has done that before. And I think that's that to me is the thing that resonates the most with these circumstances is you wonder how you're going to make it through these tough things. There are a lot of tough things that we do have, right? Heartbreak or addiction or mental health issues or physical health issues that people have, and it can feel like everything is over or feel like your world is falling apart. But you can do this. You can do the simple thing of saying, "Well, there's so many people who have it worse off," and that is true. And the circumstance that we open this podcast with is one of them for sure. But at the same time, I think you can always learn a lot more of yourself if you make that decision to succeed, to strive through it or to get through it, and then you make it. You've got to remember that the next time, and that's something that Marcus kind of reminds himself as well. That it's a very he goes through some of these things. I mean, Marcus loses how many children in his lifetime, and but he still keeps going on, and he has more, and he has a family, and he's living in a time that is as surrounded with death as we see in parts of the world today.
That's right.
But he makes the decision to keep going and try to do what's right. And in some ways, maybe another lesson to say is we don't have to lose ourselves in these basic moments of existence when you're going through these hard things. Now, it's easy
That's
for me
right.
to say that though, sitting in Canada
Mhm.
in a climate controlled house, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's not important to remember, right?
That's right. And on the other point, you know, obviously Stoics quote a lot of the past lessons.
Yeah,
So do most religions, um, and philosophies. Right? Why? Well, our wisdom is collective, right? It didn't just we're not just coming up with all this stuff in 2025.
yeah,
Everything is kind of layered on top of it in order to really understand the collective, body of human wisdom. You have to understand where it came from, and you learn from the past, good and bad, right?
yeah,
Um, but it is a pretext to the future, and the more we learn from it, the more we can take the good of the past
yeah,
into the future and leave the bad behind. And I
yeah,
think that's part of why history is so important for everybody to learn, and not just stop learning it when you get out of you know high school, primary school, or college. Learning should be continuous, and this one thing that becoming part of a group like the Stoic groups uh, will set you up to do. By the way, we have Stoicon 2025
oh yeah,
coming
that's
up.
right.
We should plug
That's
Phil and
this Saturday. Yep, that's this
Brittany's. Yeah.
Saturday, October 18th.
Yep. I am speaking at it. I think I will be in the air going over to Jordan potentially if we start getting humanitarian aid in. So I unfortunately I've recorded my piece, but
Yeah.
I'm in there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but we would suggest so. It's StoicCon 2025 this Saturday, October 18th, which is just a few days from now. And Mick is speaking in a segment that he's prepared already. And I highly recommend going to StoicCon and not to use the topic we're talking about to plug something, but it is important to mention that like if you, to those listeners out there listening to us, if you do come across these podcast episodes or the concepts that we talk about in them, and you think I'd love to know more, Stoicon is a great way to jump in a little bit and meet some people who are fellow thinkers in the same way, and learn, very educated people like Mick, right? Talk about these topics and learn about them. No, I'm serious. This isn't Mick's first time at Stoicon or any of the Stoicism events, but you can learn from people who have been doing this for a little bit of time and do that. And I think that's really important. And, to tie it back, I hope this isn't too strange of a tie back, but ultimately maybe going to something like Stoicon for somebody is a great way for them to make that choice, to make that decision, if they want to follow along a certain path or not. I don't think Mick and I are out here to be converting. We're not. This isn't a mission in some ways to say that. However, I think in many ways we've talked about how we came to this because it was in our lives, and it was, I made a choice, and I think maybe someone will too. So, yes. But yeah, this has been a really interesting topic today. I think, we should probably close with some final thoughts to sort of ask ourselves what we would want people to take away from what we've gone over today. So, Mick, do you have anything closing? Maybe something maybe if we could give something for people to think about as they finish the podcast with us and go about the rest of their day.
Well, I think the basic theme is it's not really what's done to you. It's what you do yourself. That's the only thing you can control. And I think once you accept that in your life, you'll spend less time arguing with people on social media. You might feel less sorry for yourself, which helps you be a better person to everybody around you. And if you really view it that way, then no matter how it ends, because it ends for everybody, you will feel that you had control over your destiny and you faced whatever trials we all inevitably face in your own terms.
Absolutely. I don't think I can top that. So not that it's a competition, but I think that's a good place for us to wrap up. So for those of you out there as well, I guess I'll leave with one of the quotes that I sometimes have, which is head in the icebox, heart in the oven. So, make a decision to do what you think is the right thing to do and then stick with that. I think that's a good way to go. But Mick, I think we'll sign off. So for our listeners, we'll just remind everybody that if you have thoughts on this, if you had an essay, I think we'd love to hear from you. info@pubandporch.com is a great way to reach us. And the website's still under its build, but hopefully we'll get that up soon. But you can find us in the show notes on different social media platforms that Mick and I have set up to hear from everybody. But I think for today, we'll sign off. So thanks, Mick, for a good conversation, and we'll see everyone on the next one.
Thanks, my friend. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Pub and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pubandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.